Welcome, welcome, welcome. Truly my pleasure. With us today is Christine Reyna. She's a professor of psychological science at DePaul University. Let's pull up the rest of this. Here we go. She's a professor in the psychological science department at DePaul University in Chicago. Her research focuses on stereotypes, prejudice, and intergroup relations, with an emphasis on how people legitimize prejudice using attributions, values, and moral framing. That'll become very relevant today. She has examined how these processes impact a variety of political and social issues such as racial discrimination, LGBT attitudes, immigration, poverty, healthcare, police violence, and the rise of white nationalism. Also very relevant. As a scholar interested in the universal psychological underpinnings of prejudice, she examines prejudice in all of its diverse forms, including examining prejudice across the ideological spectrum, liberal and conservative prejudice, excellent, as well as prejudice within majority and minority communities. In addition to her research, she served as the associate chair of her department for 6 years, where she developed a variety of professional development policies and programs, including one of the nation's first premiered specializations for psychology majors. She is a Latina, loves adventure sports, wandering in the wilderness, Halloween, and Harry Potter. Married, 2 children, never passes up an opportunity to indulge in her own child. That's awesome. PhD in social psychology from the University of California, Los Angeles. Excellent school. Minor in psychometrics. Wow. Social psychology, also UCLA. Psychology, UCLA. Program director, psychological sciences. Professor in psychology, associate chair. Associate professor, research associate, teaching associate, Department of Psychology, UCLA. And here's some of those white papers that she's written. Discrimination across the ideological divide, the role of value violations and abstract values in discrimination by liberals and conservatives, and the ideological conflict hypothesis, intolerance amongst both liberals and conservatives. Also this article I'll ask about. And finally, this is the article where I found the professor. One of the most sophisticated things our brains do is categorize things. If I tell you something's a chair, you instantly know lots of things about it, right? And we categorize human groups too. We categorize people by age, gender, by race, and politics, she said. Did I get anything wrong in the bio before we get started? Is there something I need to correct with?
I do have a dual appointment in psychological science and community psychology. Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to upload my newest website, but folks can look at my research at siplabdepaul.com, and that's going to be a little bit more up to date, but pretty much everything is spot on. So thank you.
Psychological science and psychology.
And community psychology.
Oh, okay. Psychological science. We can fix that right now. And community psychology. Community psychology, that sounds fascinating.
Definitely.
There we go. Professor of psychological science and community psychology. Mm-hmm. So if we got the bio right, let's go right to the meat and potatoes. I'll ask you about some of your white papers in a minute, but what was this article about? Why Democrats hate Texas and Republicans detest California? And why were you talking about stereotypes and how in politics it amplifies our divisiveness? Sorry.
Definitely. Stereotypes in general, categories in general are designed to kind of simplify the, our perceptual world. Our world is incredibly complicated, right? And we have to navigate a lot of things, a lot of logistical things, a lot of settings, objects, contexts. And our brain does this elegant thing called categorization, right? So we categorize things. And by categorizing things, it kind of gives us a place to start, right? You walk into a grocery store and you see somebody behind a cash register. You can categorize them as a cashier. You kind of know what their role is going to be. You kind of have a script for how you're going to interact with them, right? You don't have to figure it out every time you walk into a grocery store. Your brain kind of has a pre-existing conceptualization of what that is. And we do that with a lot of things. The idea is it gives us a place to start, but it shouldn't always be where we end.
Mm.
And the problem with stereotypes, right? So stereotypes are a form of, it starts with a categorization. So it starts with recognizing that somebody belongs to one group or another. And what a stereotype is the information or the content that we fill that category with, right? And sometimes that information is going to be based on personal experiences, but in the absence of personal experiences, that information can come from a lot of sources. It can come from the media. It could come from our friends and family, right? It could come from one-off life experiences where we think it's somehow representative of all future experiences we might have. And so stereotypes have this, so they can be very robust when we're not in situations where we constantly update that information and challenge those stereotypes. And so what Congressman Klug was doing in that article and the interview was trying to kind of like capture the prototypical stereotype of the left and the right? So the prototypical stereotype of the Democrat is California, like the liberal Californian, and the prototypical stereotype of the Republican is Texas. And so he was kind of using it a little bit, to kind of showcase how extreme they can be, but then really kind of went into how accurate are they, like how much should we be relying on our stereotypes?
I've seen that a lot with the research and the interviews that we've done on political polarization. There seems to be an exacerbated divide between where people. So if I'm a Democrat, I believe that Republicans are, I'm just making these numbers up right now, 90% more likely to use violence in politics, where actually only 50% of them said that. But I will assume the absolute worst about the other group, and vice versa. And so this helps take where I understand we need to make reason of the world. Our eyes are designed to pick things out of nature and make patterns instantly so that we can survive in nature. But sometimes in the modern world, it helps us go to the wrong conclusions. And then we exacerbate the divide. Was it always like this, Professor? And if you could talk as both an academic and as somebody who's living here in America, was it always like this? Were the stereotypes this bad between the two parties where we need to write articles about it? Or is this relatively new, in your opinion?
I mean, if you really go back in history, I think, the time around the Civil War makes today look like a play date in the park. I mean, I think we've definitely had moments throughout American history where we see fluctuations in polarization. And I think that when we talk about polarization, it's really important that we are all on the same page of what we are talking about,
Okay.
right? So are we talking about ideology, or are we talking about party politics, right? Being a Democrat or a Republican doesn't always necessarily mean that you are that ideologically aligned. So here in Chicago, we have, the blue collar union Democrats who can be very socially conservative. And, you have folks who are fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, progressive or liberal, right? And so how we ask that question, sometimes we're not always talking about the same thing.
Fair enough. So there's a difference between people, I believe, at the professional political level, and they actually have disagreements on policy. And then it seems to be from the research that you go down to the public level, and it's not so clear that they're arguing about policy. They may think that they are, but it's more of a feeling, a belief of the other side. You're this, like you were saying in the article. You're a Texan, so now I know XYZ about you. You're a Californian, so now I know XYZ about you. I don't need to talk to you. I don't need to second guess my assumptions. I just assumed. But, that seems to me as accurate as, well, you're Mexican. You must be here illegally. You're Mexican.
Right.
You must have undocumented people in your house. I mean, my mom was asked that a million times. We moved to a nice neighborhood, and she was like, so all your maids undocumented? Like, well, why are you asking me? Are your maids undocumented? So,
yeah.
Is it some of that where we have, yes, there is true policy differences, and people can take that too extreme, but with the public, we get to more of like an ideological characterization of the other side.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important distinction. And that's the distinction between actual policy and sort of identity politics.
Right.
This idea of a group identity. And one of the things that I always, kind of stress is that the thing that makes, the behaviors that make us really wonderful members of our own groups, which we call in-groups, the groups that we belong to, a lot of the strategies that make us really great in-group members can make us really bad out-group members, right? So we tend to be loyal to our groups. When we feel our groups are threatened, we tend to coalesce around our groups. We tend to protect each other more. We tend to enhance our sense of group connectedness and identity. We tend to, when resources are scarce, we tend to prioritize benefiting our groups over other groups. And so the things that have historically benefited us, being that we are a group-oriented species, can kind of work against us when our group starts to interface with other groups. Now, how we see those other groups is incredibly variable and incredibly situational. So we also know that as a human species, one of the things that has made us incredibly successful as a species is that we are curious, and we, unlike any other species on Earth, we have spread to every single continent on this planet, and have successfully cooperated with many, many different groups. So, if you were going to say the one thing that is the true hallmark of the human species, it's our profound capacity to cooperate, way more than any other species, way more than any other primate species even. We are incredible cooperators. And I always say, go downtown, look at a skyscraper. That skyscraper was put together by hundreds of people who didn't know each other. That whole, driving down the street, thousands and thousands of people who don't know each other at all, and everyone's following the rules,
right, with no accident.
And right, standing in line at Starbucks. You don't need armed guards to force people to do this. We're an incredibly cooperative species. But when we are in states of threat, that's when we can start to narrow our sense of who is going to protect us, who is our group, and who is the threat, who's going to harm us.
So, professor of psychological science and community psychology.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, very proud of you. Very proud of you. I'll just do this really quick. Very proud of you. I love seeing Latin people move up in the academics. It's partly why I kind of moved into it. I don't see a lot of Latin people in the higher economic fields. And when I was a boy, I'm 46, we were told, because you learned Spanish with English, your brain can't develop as well as monolingual people, and you won't be capable of higher academic feats. That's literally what they told children like me in the 1990s. I'm glad to see that we're past that. So very happy.
And actually, the research goes completely against that.
Right? It goes.
Yeah. Way more sophisticated.
It was the 1990s. It was a different time. We were told different stuff, and so I'm glad to see it. I'm not going to harp on it because I'm not about victimization, but I'm about pride. So that's awesome. I want to put that out there.
Thank you.
Now let's get to something really truly disturbing, since we had a happy moment. The moment I saw community psychology. So this is a debate I've been having. Well, not debate. I've been trying to figure this out. I'm trying to work with a clinical psychologist. I contacted some of the old professors who did psychology, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So is existential threat language as compelling to violence as plain violent rhetoric? For example, I say, hey, Christine, you see that guy across the street? Well, I really don't like him. Let's go beat him up. And I really like to punch him in the face and kick him. And you and I could go do that. And if he gets bloody, that's fine, right? Well, if that guy gets beaten up and the cops come by, they're going to go, well, you guys were clearly talking about beating this guy up. And then you instigated yourselves to violence, of course. And you instigated to Christine to violence because you were telling her for 12 hours how you want to go beat this guy up. And so, of course, she went with you. Okay, makes sense. New scenario. There's a guy across the street. And I go, Christine, I've never said anything violent to you ever. And I don't use any violent language. I go, Christine, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Okay. But if that guy across the street is there tomorrow, he said he's going to murder your daughter, your son, and your husband and your grandmother. Do with that as you will. I'm going to go over here. If you commit violence, can we say, well, hey, don't blame me. You know, I just put it out there. What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, that's and I think you're really getting at the crux of how it is that moral people do immoral things, right? So, in our, whether it's our criminal justice system or even our moral system, the same act can be seen as moral or immoral depending on the reasons for it, right? If I kill somebody in the process of protecting my family from imminent attack and death, nobody's going to help hold me accountable for it. In fact, they may lionize me as a hero.
Right.
But if I walk down the street and somebody, I look at somebody who, looks different from me or whatever, and I just decide to kill them because I don't know why. I could probably, I could face the death penalty or be in prison for a very long time, if not the rest of my life. And people will villainize me as evil, right? Yeah. And so the same outcome is perceived very differently depending on the causes. And that's, that goes into my area of research on attributions, right? So what is the attribution? And what we see with political violence is that people set up attributions by how they frame other groups or other issues, right? If you frame a group as an existential threat, if you frame, if you frame an issue as being a sacred value or fundamental to your moral existence and your moral core, right? If you frame something as a mandate by God, these are things that are very, very hard to resist. And they're things that in people's minds can legitimize violence. And we see that all the time. I mean, every genocide has been committed from, from how people portray as like a high moral standard, right? We're saving your life. We're saving our existence. We're saving our culture.
Right. So let me add a wrinkle in here. Just like the genocides, let's say the existential threat language was wrong. I told you the guy across the street was, he's going to murder your whole family and murder everybody and start a Holocaust and drop a nuclear bomb, and you go take him out. And then it turns out I lied to you. Ha ha. He wasn't that guy. Are you still a hero?
Yeah.
What are you now?
I mean, a sucker, right? I'm a murderer. I mean, the thing is that, and the reason being is preemptive violence is very hard to justify.
Okay.
Right? Because somebody may have told you, let's say, to take this scenario, somebody may have told you, man, I want to murder all of Christians. But, they could have just been, just trash talking or whatever.
Sure.
Does that give me the right to take justice into my own hands, preemptively kill them in their life? Absolutely not. Right.
No.
And so that's where we have a lot of this disconnect, is that you do have a lot of rhetoric that can get people all lathered up and feel threatened and feel outraged or even fearful. We see that a lot in extremist spaces as themes of fear and themes of threat. for 90% of the people in these spaces, they're just going to go back and forth and, talk about all the things that we should be doing and want to do. But there's going to be 10% who are going to take it to the next step.
Wow, 10%.
I don't know. I don't know exactly the percentage.
Oh, okay.
There's going to be a small percentage of people who may be struggling with their own personal issues, who may be on the brink of being suicidal anyway and want to go out in a blaze of glory. There's going to be some subset. Don't quote me on that. It's impossible to know the statistic, to be honest, because many of these folks are very isolated.
Let's say 1%.
Let's say 1%.
1% out of 300 million people's couple 100,000.
Yeah, exactly.
Bad people.
And it's probably closer to 1%, to be honest.
Okay, sure.
Right.
But like my brother was telling me, he's like, hey, 1% of a couple million people is like a lot of bad people.
Yeah.
Like that's,
and really, and as we've learned, all it takes is one person with a high capacity magazine to do a lot of damage.
But that's where I'm going with this. So I have seen, full blah, blah, blah. I try to be politically neutral. I try to confuse people as to my political leanings. Last week, I was told I watched 7-year videos. I can't tell if you're Republican or Democrat. And I said, thank you.
Nice.
Well, I'm not I believe in Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, and the way they did journalism was that's how you do it. So I'm not a modern journalism fan. I'm a classic journalism fan. I can go to those guys, and they absolutely did it that way. So that's the way that I do it. I don't listen to modern journalists who actually defy that. Like Lester Holt said, you don't need to tell both sides. You can just kind of pick one side as the right one and just tell that, and that's journalism. And he was celebrated for that. So anyways, the question that I have is, so I'm Donald Trump, right? He said, I will pay bail for you to go beat up some guy at my rally. And he said, boy, I'd like to punch someone in the face. And he said a lot of violent things. Completely. I'm not a Trump fan. He absolutely said that. He's been saying that for years. He's been encouraging aggressive talk. And he told the Proud Boys, stand down and stand by. That I remember the day he did that. That terrified the hell out of me. Bad. All bad.
And worse, he said that, Democrats are destroying the country. The press is the enemy of the people. You're not going to have a country left if you don't elect me.
Right.
Or you're not going to have a country left if you don't march down to the Capitol right now. Right. So a lot of that, and on the left as well.
Well, so Trump did some existential threat language. We can say,
absolutely.
Like, if he's going, you're not going to have a country if you don't vote for me, right? That's existential threat language. Is all over if you don't vote. So what I'm seeing, though, is that after the second presidential assassination attempt on Trump's life, I'm seeing a debate play out in public. And what grabs me, Professor Reyna, is that none of the people I see talking have a degree in psychology or sociology at all. They are political scientists, and yet they're making sweeping statements about how the human mind processes information. And I'm seeing this on multiple channels, and I'm going, how did all these people without a psychological background suddenly become psychologists?
Right.
So expertise that they could go, nope, the human mind works this way, not that way. So what I'm hearing is, I use existential threat language. If Trump's president, gays will be rounded up. They literally said that on MSNBC. If Trump's president, certain Democrats are going to be thrown into jail. If Trump's president, he's going to go after certain reporters and round them up and put them in the jail. If Trump's president, Latin people are going to be rounded up and pushed out of the country. If Trump's president, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then shootings happen. Okay. I'm watching a lot of people on news saying, you can't blame this on us. Any shootings that happen isn't because we said Trump's an existential threat, or that he's Hitler, or that America will end tomorrow, or that he's the last president, or that if you don't vote for him, everything you know about democracy will go into the earth and crash. It's because he uses violent language. So he only can be blamed for inspiring violence because he only uses violent language and existential threat language like, tomorrow, everything you know about America will end, and this will be the last presidency ever, and gays will be rounded up. That doesn't inspire people to violence at all. So there's no reason to talk about anything we've said here. Trump's to blame. He used violent language. Only he can be held to account because only violent language can compel people to violence. Is that true, Professor Reyna?
So I think there are two issues here, and I want to give law enforcement time to do their work.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so the two issues are, the issue of the assassination attempts, and the first assassination attempt, the shooter did not appear to be a particularly political person, but interestingly enough, and we can talk about this if you like, he fit the classic profile of a mass shooter. Classic profile. He checked all the boxes of a mass shooter who wanted to go out in a blaze of glory.
Sure.
The second one is alive. It's going to be interesting to see what this person, what this person's motives were. This person, there seems to be indication that this person may have some delusions. That'll be interesting to see how much the rhetoric played into that. We don't know that yet. So I think it's very easy to try to make causal connections with, things that happen contemporaneously in time, and we have to be very careful about that.
Sure.
With that said, put that aside. The answer to the question is: does reinforcing that a person is an existential threat over and over and over again, does that increase the likelihood that somebody is going to want to take matters into their own hands? Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter where that comes from, because once again, 99% or whatever that actual number is, which we probably will never know, folks are just going to, be outraged and pound their fist and hopefully go vote, people. Don't pull a trigger, go vote.
Sure.
But you're going to get folks who, for whatever reason, may see this as their opportunity to elevate their life story into a story that they see as a story of heroism. And we see this with extremists. Like, this is such a big theme, whether you're a jihadist or a white nationalist or a neo-Nazi or a Tamil Tiger. So many people who are drawn to extremist ideologies are really folks who are converting a perception of injustice or oppression into something that they see as, that they frame themselves as something noble.
Sure.
And usually in the context of mitigating an existential threat, either to your race, to your group, to your religion, or mitigating a moral contamination.
I remember being a boy. I'm 46. And they had movies all the time about World War II as I was growing up. And they'd have these movies about, oh, I could go in a time machine. I can go back and kill Hitler. I'm a good guy. So we grew up that. I remember being asked, if you could travel back in time and kill Hitler, would you? Well, yeah, my grandpa fought against them. Of course I'd do that. So you're raised as a child with this concept. And then you hear, this guy's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. What happens to the human mind?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be people who, I think that's very dangerous. I think anytime we reduce somebody, first of all, reduce their complexity as a human being, reduce them to a stereotype, and not just any stereotype, but the most extreme stereotype that we possibly can think of, then we absolutely put a target on their back, whether it's the people on the right calling liberals, commies who want to destroy America,
and pedophiles who run pizza rings,
pedophiles that run pizza, feed children to aliens in pizza parlors, or people on the left who are saying that all Republicans are fascists who want to destroy America and drown babies in the Rio Grande and you know what I mean? I think that these narratives are not helpful. They actually don't reflect most of America. And that's the thing that I will say. I think that the people who say the most shocking things. And this goes back to your commentary about the media. The media is in the business of making money. They are not in the business of telling us the truth or telling us,
Sure.
what's actually going on. It's not news anymore, unfortunately. It's,
Sure.
pundits, giving their opinions about things, which is, they have that right. But the truth is, we aren't objective consumers of information. That's another interesting feature of the human mind that was very beneficial from an evolutionary perspective, but can be not beneficial in today's, information environment. And that is that our brains are naturally pay more attention to things that are shocking and things that are threatening. We give outsized attention to those things. And so how do you get people to keep to not click the channel? Shock them, fill them with fear or outrage, right? You look at like what's the most Googled thing associated with Donald Trump nowadays. It's eating pets, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Conspiracy theory, but like, okay,
This election.
nobody's,
Yeah.
people aren't looking up his policies or looking up eating pets.
No, the elections turned into are people eating pets or not? I was realizing that the other day. That's of all the things we could be talking about, this election's turned into, are they eating pets or not?
Yeah. But I think that it's also important for people to realize that when we take a step back out of the media environment, the media really exaggerates how polarized people actually are in America. I think that yes, we are definitely in a polarized place, but it also depends on how you parse that question, the degree of what that polarization means. So, for example, when you talk about identity, right? Democrats will say, "Oh, I would be so upset if my child married a Republican," and Republicans will say, "Oh, I'll be so upset if my child married a Democrat."
Yeah.
But when you look at actual policies, there is a lot of overlap. I mean, how many times did Republicans in Congress try to repeal the Affordable Care Act? What, like 63 times or something like that? Why didn't it work? Because a lot of Republicans actually like it. And more importantly, their constituents actually like the policies within it. And so it didn't work, right? And you look at abortion today. The vast majority of Americans want women to have, the right to choose whether or not they keep a pregnancy or not, up until
The population. Yeah.
Yeah, and so many other things. Like the majority of Americans, including the majority of Republicans, support some responsible, gun restrictions, gun laws, right? I mean, background checks, like who's going to say no to a background check, I mean, there's a lot of, so when you look policy by policy, there's way more overlap on so many things than I think the media presents. When you look at our values, there's a tremendous amount of overlap, right? And when you look region by region, right, an urban Democrat is very different from a rural Democrat, right? A rural Democrat probably has a lot more in common with a rural Republican than an urban Democrat in many ways. So I think that polarization itself can be stereotyped, if you know what I mean.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And just to back that up, so the University of Virginia Sabato Crystal Ball Center did a survey about 2 or 3 years ago where they found that 80% of Democrats viewed the other side as an existential threat and 80% of Republicans. But that doesn't mean they are an existential threat. It just means people felt that way. At the same time, half the country felt that the 2020 election was stolen. Half the country felt that wasn't true.
Half the country based on what?
Based upon a large percentage of the Republican Party who was controlled by Trump. So there was a battle between the Republicans. I would call them the old school Republicans, or they're the ones that kind of work with the Democrats, versus the Trump Republicans. And basically this has been going back and forth for the last 2 years, but it looks like largely Trump has won. That's my opinion, simply because they keep trying to kick him out. And yet he's the nominee in 2016, 2020, and 2024. So say what you will, they keep coming back to this guy, and he's bested Jeb Bush and all these other people. And if you're in the party, you can't be going around saying, well, Trump lost the election in 2020, and it was so wrong for him to act like he didn't, and that Joe Biden was unelected, and to get us all whooped into that. I know a lot of conservatives, they're not saying that. Secondly, January 6th, one of the things that scared the hell out of me was not the actual January 6th event. It was the Republican Party led by Kevin McCarthy walking back condemnation of January 6th, which was then backed by all the party. That is horrifying to the Democrats. So I understand what you're saying, but there's also these big things like calling an election fake and saying someone that's not elected and storming the Capitol is cool, where there seems to be a wide divergence of opinion between the two sides. And we're talking about groups of people in the 100 million or more. Maybe there's more Democrats than Republicans, but for me, you get over 100 million people, it's not stable.
No, absolutely. And I think that's, and the reason I ask, based on who, is because, the largest and fastest growing, party identity is independent, right? And so
Sure.
you're really only talking about, when you talk about people who really embrace the Republican identity or embrace the Democrat identity, you're really talking about, roughly a third of the country in either group. And then when you look at, if you're looking at registered voters, now you're talking about even a smaller percentage.
Sure.
So I think that I think it is very important for us to ask: are we talking about liberals versus conservatives? Where do independents or moderates fall into this? What is the population of interest, and is that really reflecting the ideological diversity across America?
Yeah. I totally agree. However, couple statistics. Only 1/3 of the Americans actually were involved in the Revolutionary War. A lot of them stayed out. That still launched the entire country into a series of warfare. Additionally, when we look at IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and ISIS, they were only 2% of the Irish and Iraq societies that they came from. Obviously, a lot of people are not going to buy into this, but when a small 1 to 2% sides, I mean, ISIS did a number on that place, and Ireland was engaged in war for what? The period of the Troubles was 20 years. Again, we're talking about you get a couple 100,000 people together, that's an army. So
yeah, I mean, a very small percentage of people can do a lot of damage. I mean, that's extremism and terrorism. All of that is the capacity for a small number of people to do a lot of damage.
Are we going to get better as a country? Will we calm down? I remember Joe Biden in 2020 saying, if I'm elected, quotes, there will be a national calming. Republicans will realize that they were wrong to back Trump, and they will come to me, and then we will have a unified party and everything will be okay. That totally spectacularly failed.
Yeah.
Who's going to do the national calming here in America? And how soon till that happens, Professor?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I do think that we have to really start to think about what are the factors that are driving so much identity politics in our political system. If you go across America, first of all, we don't have a particularly engaged electorate to begin with.
Fair enough.
Especially compared to other, industrialized democracies. We have a pretty shockingly, embarrassing participation rate.
Thank you.
And then from there, right, you have a lot of folks who just aren't that interested in politics. So what ends up happening are the people with the loudest voices and the most extreme voices get the most attention, right? And so, how can we minimize their impact on the national conversation and what we need to do as a nation to actually solve our problems? What's interesting about this election is we're starting to see structural changes that are designed to kind of address that. So, for example, we know that partisan, there's some evidence, this jury's still out on how alternative models might work, but we know that, partisan primaries tend to attract candidates who cater to their base the most, right? So it can actually create sort of a retreating into the more extreme manifestations of the ideology or the party. So now we have a number of states that have on their ballots this November to eliminate partisan primaries, that anyone can vote in the primary, right? So that's going to now open the door to that huge chunk of Americans who don't identify with a political party. Right now, their voices are being completely cut out of the primary process because they can't vote unless they are affiliated with a party. That alone is going to change the landscape a lot, right? Also, jury's still out on ranked choice voting, but one thing that ranked choice voting can do is it can, the problem is people are so, because we have a two-party system, we did not always have a two-party system in America, but because we have a two-party system now, people are very scared about wasting their vote. But when you have ranked choice voting options, people are much more inclined to vote for the person they actually believe reflects their values or their idea of the best solutions without feeling like they're wasting their vote. And we have a few ranked choice voting measures on the ballot too across various states. So I think what's happening is, the media, unfortunately, until we change the incentive system in the media has found like their, their ultimate, superpower, which is keep viewers shocked, afraid, and outraged.
Sure, and you're right. They exacerbated. There's been other professors backed up exactly what you said. They called it the vicious cycle. So I'm a politician. I know if I say something extreme, I'll get media coverage. I get seen in the media, I get donations. Okay. The media shows me saying something extreme, they get commercial revenue. So both of us realize, and it just feeds on itself as a cycle. While that's true, the fact is that while the media was saying this, we got up to 80% of the Democrats and Republicans in a survey said the other guy's an existential threat. The kind of language we used for ISIS.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
that's the narrative they're hearing over and over again.
So it's, even if they're not 100% buying it and it's not true, we can see where the media lying can exacerbate tension, perhaps. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think, the media has a capacity to create a sense of reality for people. Especially, I think this becomes more problematic the more we retreat into isolated spaces, exacerbated by the pandemic, of course. But even after the pandemic, I mean, people want to work from home now. People want to, people are just becoming more and more isolated. We're becoming more and more isolated as a society, which means we're relying more and more on the media to give us an insight into what reality is. And the problem is it's not reality. It's not giving us an insight into reality. So the more that we shift our waking lives online, the more the exaggerated narratives that are perpetuated by the media are going to define what our sense of reality is.
I think I'm getting an impression of this, but I'd just like to ask clearly. Let's say they change the primary elections. And let's say they change the funding mechanism for politicians and they make it government funding and you can't get in. And let's say they do 4 or 5 other reforms. And we're still just as polarized. What then?
I don't, well, the good news is I don't know if that would happen necessarily.
Fair enough.
And the only reason I say this is because despite these, yes, if you look at, if you, my guess is these are people measuring, surveying Democrats and Republicans, and they're completely leaving out the independents, right? So if you're leaving out at least, at minimum, a third of the country from this conversation about polarization, then we're not getting the full picture, right? And so when you look at, still to this day, I mean, I look at election surveys and things like that, the majority of Americans are still moderate, not super polarized in terms of their political activities, in terms of their political attitudes. And so the narrative of polarization absolutely does exist. We are seeing less cooperation across party lines in Congress. We're seeing, an exaggeration of stereotypes. We're seeing a less willingness on both the left and the right, by the way, to engage and interact with people that they think are ideological rivals. But when you look at day-to-day reality, people interact with their ideological rivals all the time without incident. Most people are moderate. Most people get along with their neighbors. Most people want the same things in life. And so I have faith that when we allow those voices to emerge, that we're gonna see something different.
Fair enough. And who knows the future? Absolutely. My concern is that I've been able to interview a fair amount of professors.
Yeah.
And for every solution to political polarization, there seems to be a reason to believe that it won't work. I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but many professors have said there is no such thing as independence. There are people who don't want to get in arguments and claim that they're Republican or Democrat, but this is people who study the field. I'm not saying what the truth is. It's just what I've heard. So they're not actually independents. They're Republicans or Democrats. They will ideologically fall into place. They just don't want to be seen as that. I've also heard about ranked choice voting that was tried, I believe, in Alaska. It did not result in more independence. It resulted in second-tier candidates trying to take down the first-tier candidates and give votes to the other party. Finally, we looked at primaries, I believe in Louisiana, Alaska, and then there was another place where they did rid of Nebraska. They got rid of primaries. It did not get the results that they wanted. Now, maybe things will be different at the national scale, but there are some professors who said, for every solution you have, I have a caveat on how it may not work. So,
sure. Go on. I'm sorry.
So what if we get to the point where, and maybe they're all wrong, right? We've never tried national ranked choice voting. We've never tried removing primaries at the national scale. We've never tried all these things. So maybe they're wrong, and we try that.
And I'm not saying that those are necessarily the solution. I'm just saying that, and I'm not saying remove primaries. I'm saying
sure,
let everyone vote.
Sure.
And I think the jury is absolutely still out on ranked choice voting. What I'm saying is that we do need to start thinking about how to include more voices in our political process earlier on in the process. Now, if the country, if you take a step back from party politics, and we are also trapped in a two-party system at present.
Right. Totally.
And as a result, if you're an independent or a moderate and you want to vote, you're going to have to pick one or the other. So it does look at the end of that chain as though all moderates and independents actually are a Democrat or a Republican, because they don't have a lot of choices other than not vote, right? So in the end of the day, they're going to behave like a Democrat or a Republican, even if they don't necessarily want to. What I do know is that the majority of Americans are reasonable. That I do know. I do know that there's a reason that, extremes are called extremes. It's because they're not numerically common. And so I have faith that Americans can work together if the right circumstances are created. Now, what is my thing? Will we still be, as long as we're a two-party system, we're going to have some identity politics. We're going to have election cycles where people are going to take out their playbook of the best tricks to get voters, motivated, right? You have to mobilize your voters. How are you going to mobilize your voters? Well, we've already discovered that getting them very emotionally aroused and agitated is going to mobilize them. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Fair enough. And I absolutely agree that, they're exacerbating things, but I keep coming back to how well is it working? I mean, even if people are moderate and they know better, you keep having this stuff beaten into you. For example, you were talking about the marriage thing. I just looked that up. 40% of Democrats said they would date across party lines, 48% of Republicans, 49% of independents. That is less than half of each group saying they would date outside of their party. Not good, right?
Well, it's certainly not good for encouraging, diversity of ideas and looking at other points of view. That's for sure.
But we're talking about how the media is extreme, but the public's not. Over half the public's saying, I hate the other side so much I won't date them. Because I looked at these statistics. It wasn't like this in the 90s. It was like around 12%. So we're actually seeing the public shift.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think that, we're starting to attach more of our sense of our worldviews and our sense of values to our political parties. I think more so than we have although this has been going on for a long time. Um, but I mean, as a psychologist, the marriage thing doesn't surprise me that much, actually. I think if you ask people about a lot of things, people will say they would rather marry somebody that they feel compatible with, versus, you could say the same thing about their religion. Would you rather marry someone who shared your religious views versus not? They're going to be like, yeah, of course. I mean, so I think we have to put this in context. People are going to want to, their hobbies, their interests, how they want to spend their
sure.
time, right? So a lot of people are going to want to marry somebody who's going to be similar. They're going to hang out with people who are similar, but I think that can become problematic when people want to restrict their lives to only people who see the world the way they see the world. I think ideological diversity is hugely important. Diversity of opinions is very important because it allows you to look at very complicated problems from multiple perspectives. And you can't solve a complicated problem unless you look at it from multiple perspectives because it has multiple causes. And so the
Totally
idea
agree.
of becoming ideologically siloed actually is a bad thing for democracy.
I
And
completely agree. Completely agree.
yeah. And I think that, as a professor, I mean, this is one thing that I really try to encourage in my classes, to encourage people to go outside of their ideological comfort zones and to start thinking about problems from other groups' perspectives and other people's perspectives. And I think as a country, we need to be better at having those conversations. I think we've lost the capacity to have civil disagreements.
So when Donald Trump says, I'm willing to sit down with AOC, and AOC says, ooh, disgusting, I'll never be seen near that guy, that's not helpful for us having discussions as a country. Is that fair?
That's not helpful.
Okay. I hear you. I'm just concerned that this marriage thing, because I looked at the numbers and they were like in the 1990s, it was like 12-20%. Now we're up to over half.
Yeah. I mean, that tells me, but you also, when you look at in the 1990s, there was also a lot more political cooperation. So if you
Right.
look at how much Congress and the Senate voted across party lines and did bipartisan types of deals, it was, I mean, the blue and the red were very overlapping.
Yeah.
And so back then, it was very easy to conceptualize the parties as having very similar points of view. They worked more together. They shared a lot of the same values, and solutions. And now you're seeing the parties becoming more and more and more polarized. But I think when you get down to the details, I mean, look at the presidential campaign right now. Look at how much their policy propositions, aside from the social, the
Eating pets.
hot button social issues, when you look at the pragmatic policies, how much they overlap.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
We're not going to tax, tips. We want to encourage, no one's going to abolish Obamacare. They've abandoned that.
Right.
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 Fracking's still going to happen.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
You need some kind of response. I don't know, maybe some background checks, whatever, and, okay, we're a lot of backpedaling on the abortion thing. Like, when you look at the actual nuts and bolts of the policies, we're really not as far apart as the media makes it out to be.
I've heard that they'll pick a few hot nut button issues like abortion at election time, so they have something to go, see, we're different from the other party, because they don't want to see that there's this uniparty with overlap. I'm only going to mention, I'm not going to dive into it. When you look at the Gaza Strip Israeli situation, Kamala and Trump have the exact same policy. That's all I'm going to say. We'll move on from there.
I mean, if you look at Obama's Afghanistan policy, it looked almost identical to George W. Bush's.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it was. And I saw during the election for Obama's re-election, they had some admiral some four-star admiral come out and go, basically, there's no difference between Obama and Bush's policy. You never see that, but it was right at election time. So Obama got this admiral to come out and say, no, it's the same thing. What I'm worried about, I also want to back you up. Most of the democratic world, that's first world, has ranked choice voting, multi-party systems. People get to have votes and everybody gets represented. America is an outlier. Almost none of the rest of the modern world that's a modern democracy does that. Yep. Additionally, when we set up democracies in Iraq and Afghanistan, we set it up on the multi-party system, not on the American system. So nobody follows our model. And even when we invade a country and set up a democracy, we don't even set up our own model. We've done that twice. So no, it does. It's ridiculous. The Japanese call it the American winner takes all style democracy, and they view it as asinine by definition. They just view it as mad.
Winner takes all politics exacerbate polarization.
Right? Yeah. That's what the Japanese say. They go, you guys must just love fighting with each other because your whole system.
Yeah. I mean, that is, I mean, if you really want to ask what one of the solutions is to reduce polarization is have more options.
I agree, because the way they put it is you wouldn't tell somebody, oh, you just lost. Yeah. Your people are in Congress. They get some power. They're going to have to work it out versus, no, you lost. It's our turn one. Ha, ha, ha. Deal with it for 4 years.
And somehow it's a mandate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, like so many Americans don't even vote and you only got a certain percentage, but somehow it's a mandate. I mean, that's the problem. And with multi-party systems, it forces collaboration. Right. You do have to form coalitions. You do have to. I mean, not all the coalitions are necessarily like, ideologically diverse. Let's be clear about that. But it does create a different dynamic in politics. The winner take all two-party system is ripe for polarization, and it makes it easy to become reductionist in our views of demonizing the other party. Of using stereotypes, of feeling very desperate that, if you don't win, you're going to lose everything. Like those are the only two options, right? Right. And that's not healthy. That's not healthy for a democracy.
No, it seems like it's almost like you're fighting a literal war instead of taking a survey, which is what it was supposed to be designed when you go back to the ancient Greeks. Okay, last two questions. How bad is it now? We heard you talking about the Civil War. Hey, it's not Civil War bad. Is it 1960s bad? Is it Civil War bad? And before you answer, I'd like to point out the parable of Bleeding Kansas. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to a lot of historians, they go, well, not as bad as the Civil War. Okay. Tell me about Bleeding Kansas. And they go, oh, yeah, that was a little period before. Bleeding Kansas was what set up the country for the Civil War. Northerners and Southerners were not willing to kill each other and watch each other die until they had read newspaper articles for about a decade of them shooting each other in cold blood. That's what actually got them primed as a country to be willing to kill each other in mass. So when I see January 6th, and when I see more talk about, let's get him and he's a Hitler, what if happens if we have two more January 6th? 3, 4. Do we get to the point where we're having a Bleeding Kansas type event, which did precipitate the Civil War and most historians accidentally ignore?
We can have a whole other conversation about that,
Good answer. Very judicious. Very judicious, Professor.
Yeah, the lead up, the causes of the Civil War happened long before Bleeding Kansas, but I will say I am very concerned about the trends of democracy in America as well as globally. We are seeing this. There has been a decline in democracy and threats to democratic institutions across the democratic world. We are seeing shifts towards more authoritarian leaders in some places. I'm just looking at, Italy's newest
Yeah.
Prime Minister and other places in Europe, right? So we're seeing this shift that's happening. And even here in America, there's a lot of people have, very low confidence in our democratic institutions, right? I mean, the Supreme Court, the all-time lows for the Supreme Court, a lot of distrust in our electoral system, even though it's been historically, fairly secure. You always get, bad actors here and there. But for the most part, when you get millions and millions of people, things are going to happen at some point. And you get people who are, and one of the things that I'm exploring really is how, and this is been going on for a long time, is that when people are in states of threat, especially existential threat, they're willing to compromise their civil liberties for security. And if you can convince people that they are in a constant state of existential threat, then they're willing to constantly consider those trade-offs, right? And we saw that after 9/11. People were willing to give up their privacy. People were willing to, allow for unprecedented levels of surveillance, except maybe back in the McCarthy era. And that level of surveillance has hardly budged, right? It's become the new normal. And so as we can continue, once again, that the media is going to create our sense of reality, as Americans continue to think that America is in a state of existential threat, or they themselves are in a state of existential threat, or, America is a disaster and it's falling apart, or whatever the narrative is, they're going to give up some things for the promise of security. And that's what scares me the most.
I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, people who are willing to give up their freedom for security deserve neither, was the quote.
And they get neither. And that's, look at the history of autocracies, you're not going to get the security you want.
Some people pointed out the autocracy, oligarchy aspects here. You had, I think, what was it, Mitch McConnell freezing out in front of a microphone last year, but he was still boss. Dianne Feinstein here in California gave over power of attorney to her daughter, but stayed as a voting senator. So that tells you everything. And not an eye was batted. Totally normal. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of term limits. I'll just throw that out there.
I'm just saying,
keep it fresh.
I'm just saying. And hopefully there's well, let me ask you that. One of the last two questions, we're winding down. You're a professor of psychological science. You're a professor of community psychology. I'm asking you about political polarization and how people feel psychologically divided from each other. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all of your solutions were not psychological. They were reforms to the political system. Do you have things to heal us psychologically as Americans? Is there a strategy we could pursue? Or is that not really even possible, and really just political reform is the only way we can do this?
No. I think there's lots of things we can do as individuals. So when we look at stereotypes in general, right? One thing we know about stereotypes is that people use stereotypes to the degree that they think they're informative, right? When we get information that's more diagnostic, so like when we actually get to know a person, for example, our stereotypes become useless, right? We don't need them anymore because now we know actual information about an actual person. And I think that we need to do more of that, where we have conversations, where we have the opportunity to get to know people who are different from us in ways that are meaningful, so that we can move past our stereotypes. We can sit there and live within our stereotypes all we want when we never have to venture outside of our tiny bubble, right? We can, who cares if the stereotype is right or wrong? We're never going to interact with those folks anyway, right?
Brilliant.
But when we challenge ourselves to realize that, our neighbor may not agree with us on everything, or the person down the street, or read across the ideological spectrum. I always read liberal media and conservative media, right? To look at different points of view. And when you start to do that, you really quickly realize your stereotypes aren't reflective of reality. They're not going to help you. They're going to be wrong most of the time. And we need that. And without that, then we are just at the whim of whatever, the most extreme voices are telling us.
That's brilliant. Okay. I want to show you this chart, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
So this is called, these are landslide election counties. Let's see if we can you see the whole map? There should be like a, series of charts there.
There are a series of maps, yes. Okay.
Okay, so all I need you to notice is that the red gets bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So the one at the top is 1992. You can see a little bit of red blotches. Let me see if we can make this better.
Maybe make it one page. Yeah.
We'll do this. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. That's better. Yeah.
So 1992, counties where presidential candidates won the two-party popular vote by more than 20 percentage points, meaning, Clinton beat whoever by 20 points in that county, which is huge.
Yeah,
it's called the landslide election county. As we were just talking about, some elections are won by like, I got 52 and you got 48%. These are 20% difference, Martin, a huge amount. There wasn't many landslide election counties in America in 1992. You can see the blue and the red. They exist for both. Now we go to 1996, then 2000, then 2004, 2008. Now we're here at 2016. Almost all red, but the blue areas, while smaller, went from light blue to hardcore dark blue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is showing how people are voting. It's related to this concept called the big sort that says people are sorting themselves out into ideological communities.
Yeah.
So they are moving or they're not moving, but they're psychologically saying, I feel being more like a Republican in my Republican mostly leaning town is the right thing to do. And what we're getting to is where this affects voting to where we used to have a majority of the country. There were not landslide election counties. Maybe they went for Clinton, maybe they went for Dole. And now we're getting to where a majority of the counties are landslide election counties. There is no possible chance that they'll ever pick the other candidate. Don't even bother running here. This has been documented. How do we undo that, given that's a 30-year trend?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot I can say about this.
Please.
I do. Well, let me say a couple of.
The concept's called the big sort for everybody there if you want to look it up.
Yes, and the big sort is real. I do want to.
Oh, that was my next question. We have a mind.
Hold on, to a degree. I mean, let me caveat that. Meaning, okay. people do form there is ideological sorting. People want to be with people that share their values and worldviews. That's not a surprise. But I do want to caution about maps like this because I always feel like it's easy to get like the red Sharpie and be like, But the reality is, if you actually did this map, if you recreated this map by population centers, it's not gigantic blobs of red. A lot of that red is in places where there are no human beings whatsoever. Like there are mountains and rivers and deserts and farmland that goes on for miles and miles and miles. When you look at actual population centers, it does not look that dramatic. So I just want to put that on
I totally agree. But the problem, though, Professor, is that our elections, as we've learned, are not by popular vote. They're
right. No. Right. But what I'm saying is that I think that exaggerates the fact that, especially in the middle of America, you don't have a lot of major population centers outside.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of blank space there.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, though, let's talk about why, going back to this whole thing, why are we becoming more and more polarized? And I think that's going part and parcel with, a lot of the things that we're talking about. And once again, everything's overdetermined. Gerrymandering is a huge problem, right? How do you get these, so that's another thing that's been changing over time, right? People have figured out a way to ensure that they have these margins permanently, regardless of the actual makeup of these districts. And so that's going to be a big factor. Like if you controlled for the gerrymander, would you still get these trends this dramatically, right? So part of it is that people have found a way to ensure larger margins through things that are not necessarily reflective of the actual, will of the populations within those counties. So that's a problem. So there's so many layers, and that's the thing, is that there's no simple cause and there's no simple answer. So when you can get rid of the political shenanigans that reinforce this, then yes, we do need to get back to having more of a focus on looking at policy, right? Looking, reducing stereotypes, having more dialogue, having more cooperation, right? Creating political systems where cooperation is reinforced instead of punished, right? When you have, party, restricted primaries where you have to be a member of the party in order to vote for the primary, it's easy to get primaried out, right? So everyone is like racing to the extreme right or racing to the extreme left,
Right.
so they don't get primaried in the primaries. Well,
Right.
one way to get rid of that is like let anyone vote for let anyone vote in the primary, and then you have people who will start to race towards the middle because now they want to appeal to all the voters.
That is the theory. That is the theory.
That's
Although
the theory. That's the
who
theory.
studied it who said it may not work out that way, but yes,
It may not, and it may not in certain places, right?
Sure.
But you're also running against all these other factors, these, the gerrymander and the this and the that, right? So it's because we're trying to tackle, ideas in a theoretical context that don't necessarily reflect the messiness that gets in the way of those things. So do I have faith in the American public that most people are reasonable and moderate? Yes, I know that, looking at psychological research across the country. But those people don't necessarily have the capacity to allow those opinions to translate into political outcomes.
There you go. And to totally back you up, here's the map I think you were referring to. Right, so it's mostly blue, right, by population. Yeah. So it's mostly blue. If you look at this, it's overwhelmingly blue. The one in the bottom, that's population. The one above is by counties. So population, majority of the population blue, totally. Counties, majority red. The problem is that there's many political scientists who said our election system in the Constitution is based upon counties and states and not on the popular vote. And that's why Hillary lost in 2020 and the other ones. So they're going, oh yeah, we have the popular vote. Great. You still lost the election. I think it was when Brett Kavanaugh was elected to the Supreme Court. The Washington Post wrote, Senate Republicans who had a majority in the Senate but represent 40% of the population colluded with the president who didn't win the popular vote to put in elected Supreme Court justices who aren't supported by the majority of the population. Completely legal. So yeah, nobody wanted those guys. Senate put them in. Nobody wanted that. As president put them in. And so they were pointing out, well, yeah, that's not what the people wanted. But because of the Constitution and 2 senators, they won. They got what they wanted. Brett Kavanaugh. That's not what people, certainly out here in California, wanted. So
yeah, there's another map. I wish I had it at the ready where you can look at the United States and it's actually separated by population center, not county. Because the other thing that, and talk about reinforcing stereotypes. The other thing that worries me about the county level maps where the entire county is colored red, even though most of it is uninhabited, is that it reinforces the stereotype that all America is Republican or all America is conservative. And these crazy liberals are like the tiny minority that's trying to drive the narrative or drive everyone else's outcomes. And I think once again, like anything we can do, anytime we can offer information that dismantles these stereotypes, that's helpful. And part of that is, okay, the truth is large swaths of America are not colored red or colored blue. They're blank. Right there you go, right there. Like this gives you such a different view of politics in America than the Sharpie maps, right? Like if you look at this, you're like, you know what? America's actually really ideologically diverse. And we actually should be talking to each other more. It just gives you such a different view, right?
Well, I see certainly the large blue population centers, and it's the majority of the population. However, I think if you zoomed in on that map, you would find New York City surrounded by all conservatives. You can zoom
Absolutely. And what I'm saying is, like, yeah, I mean, I'm in Illinois. Are you kidding me? Like, Chicago is like this big
exactly. So yeah, so
and you get lots of, but what I'm saying is this idea, and I call it the Sharpie map, because it's like all of that blank space gets colored in red. No, the blank space is uninhabited. It's not, there aren't a lot of people there. So it exaggerates this idea of like what the ideologies are of Americans. And when you look at this map by population center, absolutely you're going to have more red in the less densely populated areas and more blue in the more densely populated areas, but you're also going to have a lot of just nothing. And when you look at this, it looks like Americans that are liberal and conservative, or is this Democrat or Republican, are a lot more 50-50. They're a lot more balanced. And that's the reality. And if we can start from here and say, hey, look, there's actually a good amount of people who are Republican, a good amount of people who are Democrat, and there's actually they overlap a lot in these regions. So let's try to find a path forward. I mean, this entire country for a very long time has been a two-party system, and we have moved forward through Democrats, and we've moved forward through Republicans, and we've moved forward through a lot of cooperation. So let's start with this map. And I think we can have better conversations when we look at this map, because it doesn't reinforce the stereotypes as much. Does that make sense?
It does, but I have to push back a little bit. Yes, you're absolutely right. Population-wise, this is the more accurate map. Yeah. Huge population centers of blue with little bits of red around them. Unfortunately, when it comes
to big sections of red too. I mean, let's not ignore that, right? Sure. Big sections of red. But I think that this reflects more of the fact that it's not, that Democrats and Republicans are probably a lot more balanced. I mean, and we know that from national polling that, we have roughly about a third of people identify as Democrats and about a third identify as Republicans. Yeah. So they're roughly equal proportions.
Yeah.
And that's what we see in this map. We don't see that in the Sharpie map.
Absolutely. I'm just pointing out, this is the way that elections are held. They're by county, they're by state.
Yeah.
And we've had presidents multiple times become president when they did not win the popular vote. Mm-hmm. And we just had Supreme Court justices nominated when they did not have a majority of the population backing them, but they had a majority of the Senate backing them. So you're right as far as people goes, but as far as vote goes, these are not absent districts. They affect election.
Yeah, right. And I think that when we talk about the district, like if people understood, this is a district. This is not a giant square filled with lots of people who have the same ideology, right?
Sure.
And I think that so it's what wins votes versus what reinforces stereotypes. And so yeah, when it comes to votes, there are going to be places. We are an incredibly culturally diverse country. There are, we have the history of America is a history of, waves of immigration from places all over the world for all kinds of reasons that have created very different cultures in different regions in America. Like the upper Midwest is a very, very different culture than the South or than the West Coast, right? So we have all these different cultures that have different ideologies. And I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that makes America a very diverse and very interesting place. And yes, we do win elections by counties, but it doesn't mean the entire state of North Dakota is red.
Oh, true. But if we do a deep dive, so if you go from here's Georgia and here's to Illinois, okay, so lots of blue, lots of red overlapping at this scale. But if we zoom in, there's very distinct blue and red splotches. So there is on the left, that is Atlanta very blue, surrounded by very dark red around the whole thing. And then the entire southern portion, there's a band going through the center. When we look at Illinois, you have Chicago there in the top right corner, and then dark red for most of the state. And I just wanted to point out that, yes, when you look at this map, they overlap. But when you zoom in, you see very strong political segregations.
So once again, I think that, right, like this is a great example of a Sharpie map, right? So yes, this is broken down by county. And when you look at it color-wise, because we are very visual people, and I think that I think if the average person looked at this map, the impression they would walk away from is, oh my gosh, Illinois is all of these conservative Republicans are in Illinois, and you have this tiny pocket of liberals driving all the policy. But the reality is most of that, the red sections of those maps, are really, really small population centers. And yes, they happen to be, small counties with small populations, so you color the entire county red. But when you look at the actual population of Illinois, like the huge majority of people are clustered in that upper right-hand corner. Yeah. And you have little tiny dots scattered throughout, except as you get towards, Kansas City and that area down at the bottom, right? So you have these really, so when you look at this tells a very different story. This doesn't tell the story of a tiny group of people forcing their ideological will on this, this silent majority. No, the majority is the blue blob up in the upper right-hand corner. All these other spaces are tiny little population centers.
Right.
And I think they just tell different stories, and it's important that we tell those stories because we don't want to be part of the problem of perpetuating the stereotypes.
No, so the one on the right is a population map, or what we would call true democracy. And then the one on the left is a county vote map and what we would call the modern American democratic system.
Yes. Right. And they're both accurate stories, right? The county map is going to be like, look, this is how people are voting at the county level. Great. That doesn't mean that is lots and lots of silent people.
Right.
They're very, very small population centers that are just little drops in the bucket because everyone happens to want to live near Chicago, and I don't blame them because Chicago's fabulous.
I heard the pizza's good.
So. Pizza's great.
So you're right. You're right. And thank you. This helps me understand, and I do the series for the audience to understand. Both of these maps are correct for the public, but they tell wildly different stories, and they give you different perspectives. One is population, and one is by county. And if you look at the county map and you go, well, that's a representation of the people's will, that's not accurate. The one on the right is the representation of the people's will. It clearly shows you the majority is the blue. Unfortunately, as we've seen, baked in the Constitution when it comes to the Supreme Court, the Senate, and the presidency, many scholars have pointed out there's something called the tyranny of the minority, and that the county election process can have people who did not win the popular vote get into seats of power, like Donald Trump, like George W. Bush, and like Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett.
Well, I have a prediction.
Let's hear it. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Hold on. Prediction.
Heard it here first. As demographics continue to change in America, the Electoral College is no longer going to be friendly to Republicans, and they're going to be the ones pushing to end it.
Fair enough. Fair. Oh, I just got what you said. That no one's saying that.
There you go. Oh, exclusive. You got the exclusive scoop.
Oh my God. Hold on. Let me write that out. So as demographics shift, the Republicans will push for a removal of the Electoral College.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now we have, the swing states. I don't know what's going to happen in 2024, but if the Republican Party continues to significantly lose in the swing states, they're going to realize they need the votes of Californian Republicans, and they need the votes of Republicans all over the country. I mean, when you look back, even at the population map, there's a lot of Republicans all over the country whose votes are not counting. And at some point, the electoral college is no longer going to benefit that party.
I have not heard that before, and that's fascinating. You're the first person to predict that. I've talked to over 220 professors, read all the books. No one's saying that. That's brilliant. That makes a lot of sense, because people would push that the Republicans love the electoral college, right? That's how they're getting all this power. But you're saying, draw this out into the future when the demographics are really not in your direction. You're going to have to get rid of the electoral college so that you can pull all those individual Republican votes around the country together to win. Wow. That's awesome. Is there anything I didn't ask? Is there something you'd like to point out that you feel is key to understanding? Or do you have another awesome, unique prediction?
Yes. And it's relevant to both of us. So this, and maybe we'll have another conversation someday about extremism.
Absolutely.
And white nationalism.
Yes. Okay.
But whiteness has been a moving target since its inception. And as the traditional white majority declines in America, Hispanic will be the new white. You heard it here first.
New majority?
As the white majority continues to decline, they're going to start just like whiteness was exclusive to the English and Irish need not apply. Irish were not considered white. Italians were not considered white. Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans were not considered white. Now they're considered white. As America changes, the new white will be Hispanic.
Wow. Yes. So, okay, well, let me ask you then. I have been told on TV, if you say Latin people are coming into the country in large amounts and they're going to replace the white population, that's called the Great Replacement Theory, and it is a white nationalist conspiracy, and it's bad for us to even bring that up. So what's true?
Well, the conspiracy is not true. I mean, there is no intentional cabal to replace white people. Like, that's just completely ridiculous. Now, are there demographic changes? The truth is white people, and I know that's such a broad category. It's even kind of awkward to say it because, like, who's in that category?
Right.
I mean, Hispanic isn't a race; it's an ethnicity. And,
right.
and European Hispanics, you have Afro Latinos, you have all kinds of different folks. So, the reality is that native-born white Americans are not having children at a replacement rate. They're not. That's not the cause of a conspiracy. That's not the cause of Latin Americans coming across the border. That's the cause of people choosing not to have children. And this is something that's happening in wealthy industrialized nations across the globe, right? And this is kind of the curse of the wealthy industrialized nation is birth rates decline. And it's happening all over. We're probably middle of the pack in terms of that demographic cliff. Other countries are facing that cliff sooner than we are. But native-born Americans, period, are not having children at a replacement rate. And there have been some reports out of, some kind of hidden, tucked away reports from the Congressional Budget Office that do projections of the American economy with and without different rates of immigration. And, we can't, our economy is not sustainable with our current birth rates. That's a fact.
Thank you. Yeah, I had this debate with people in the 90s.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, every country that's facing the demographic cliff, they need immigration to survive, right? Of course, you can debate about, like, what type of immigration and what are the rules and all of these things. So the Great Replacement conspiracy theory is this notion that the demographic decline and the need or uptick in immigration is part of some larger cabal to wipe out white people.
Okay, so demographics changing, okay to say. Secret cabal changing demographics, bad.
Bad, exactly.
Okay,
there you go.
Because I just heard, if you say the Great Replacement Theory, you're a racist. I'm like, well, I think that a little bit of this is happening. Is that, what are we talking about here? So, okay, thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
The white population is shrinking because people like to have 2 kids or less as they come into money. Immigrants typically are poorer. They come here to get a job and rise up. But when you're not making as much money, they'll have more kids. So that's just demographic.
I think that's an oversimplification a little bit. I think that, it takes a lot of money to immigrate to the United States. You do have diaspora that are war refugees, folks who are fleeing conflict or disease or political instability. But a lot of folks that are coming from a faraway place had means once. When you talk to a lot of immigrants, a lot of the refugee population, because there was a huge refugee population in Chicago, as you know, that, a lot of those folks that were like, yeah, back home, I was a lawyer.
Oh, like in Venezuela?
I was a business owner, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get the money to pay for that journey?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
up to
so you
10 to
have a lot of,
13,000 here. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with a lot of the immigrant children, and yeah, you're right. They can't read in English, but boy, can they read in Spanish.
Don't even get me started on the difference in education systems.
Right.
We won't even talk about multilingualities. So in America, we still have this opinion everybody needs to speak English, and it somehow makes us all smart.
And then we turn around and spend billions of dollars to teach people a foreign language so that we can actually compete on the global stage. It's completely backwards.
Well, and they've already proven that most of the modern world speaks multiple languages.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
That's how you get smart, is knowing. And here we're like, what, you know more than English? What's wrong with you? Like, something wrong?
Oh man, I just want those people to travel abroad. I feel so embarrassed sometimes. I'm like, we only speak one language.
I'm just saying, I remember I went to Amsterdam and they were like, yeah, the average Amsterdam person speaks 4 to 6 languages. It's key to our economy. It's what allows us to do all this international trade. And I'm like, oh, we reject that idea in America. We're like, you need to speak American. Right? That's our, and when we go to invade Iraq and Afghanistan, we're like, well, you guess you all need to start speaking American. I saw something where it's some joke on TikTok and saw, oh, did you have oil? I might need to come up there and open up a can of democracy on your ass. No. So anyways, we don't. Yeah, so it is shrinking. I have heard the U.S. Census say that while there are more non-white babies born now, it won't be till the year 2042 or 2044 where there's a majority of non-whites voting.
So the other thing that I think people need to keep in mind with this demographic shift is that for the foreseeable future, even though white Americans will no longer be over 50% of the population by around 2050, they will still be overwhelmingly the largest singular racial group. And I think for when you listen to folks who are kind of pushing the Great Replacement Theory and sort of like the sounding the alarm about these demographic shifts, there's this erroneous assumption that all non-white people are somehow banding together in some anti-white coalition. And it's like, well, okay, then you don't understand groups, because all of these other groups don't necessarily get along either, and we're all trying to figure it out. And but America will still be largely white. There'll just be lots of other groups that, when you add them all up together, are more than 50%.
Fair enough. And just for the oops, I was trying to get a picture. This is what I'm talking about. So just so that everybody's on the same page, was that famous rally in Charlottesville where you had the tiki torches and a bunch of Caucasian people, and they seemed very upset. And they kept saying, you will not replace us. You will not replace us. Oh, Jews will not replace us. And I'm like,
Jews will not replace us too.
I was confused as a Latino. I said, why aren't you pointing that at Latin people? I didn't know what they were saying yet. I didn't know the whole, I just saw this. And I'm like, Jews are going to replace. There's not even enough Jews to do this. You guys should be complaining about Latin people. And then I found out, well, they are. They're just they're blaming Jews for the Latin. I'm like, oh,
right.
Okay,
you know, the Jewish space lasers are part of the Great Replacement theory.
So Jewish people are controlling Latin people's immigration here, because Latin people haven't been trying to come here for the last 100 years on their own.
all on their own.
we needed a secret Jewish cabal to convince us to move up here, because that's not a thought that hasn't occurred to Latin people in all 20 to 30 different countries over the last century. Yeah.
And you know what gets all the attention? The crazy conspiracy theories.
So I wonder what happens between now and then. I hope it gets better. I had also seen some data that when you looked at the country of Fiji and a couple other countries, there was this theory that when you go through a demographic shift, the actual propensity of violence increases. So when you have, like, let's say Fiji, 50% ethnic Fijians, 50% Indian nationals who immigrated there over the last 200 years, kind of peace. When it starts to look like the Indian nationals are shrinking to 40% and the ethnic Fijians are moving to 60%, and you're moving from 50 to 40, 60, boom, lots of violence, because now we can be dominant. Before we couldn't. Now we have the opportunity to be dominant. Let's take it. And so there were some people who theorized that when you have this kind of equilibrium, it's fine. But when you start to see these shift and the people in power are losing power, much like the Sunni of Iraq, right? Yeah. They get even more vicious. So we looked at Iraq, we looked at Fiji. There is, who knows the future, but there is at least some theory out there that when you do these demographic shifts and the people in power are realizing we're not going to have the majority, we're going to be the minority, they lash out to retain power. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really important point, that, you know, underlying almost all major intergroup conflicts are issues of status and power. And I think that that's really important. What's interesting about the demographic shift, if you look at cities that are very, very diverse, small changes in demographics don't really upset people very much. But when you look at places that are very homogenous, even tiny bumps of demographic change, even a small number of, you know, Latinos or Black people moving into those like all white communities, that seems like a radical change, right? So if you're very diverse, like a few more of this group versus that group doesn't move the needle for you. You're just like, yeah, that's just who we are. And so it's that perception of radical change that can terrify people, right? And in any direction, whether it's, you know, gentrification, you know, white people moving into ethnic neighborhoods and, you know, buying up houses and businesses, or, you know, Black and brown people moving into white neighborhoods and buying up houses and businesses. When the perception of the ratio changes, that's when I think people might notice it more and may start to develop attributions about it. With that said, the majority of Americans, actually, if you look at national polling, think diversity is a positive thing.
Right. By population.
Yes. By population, the majority think diversity is positive.
Right.
The majority think that that immigration is a net positive.
Right.
And, you know, and I think that one thing that makes America different from Fiji is that we are a country historically of immigrants.
True.
And we also have pure, you know, birthright citizenship. So anyone can have a genuine American identity. And I think that's a positive. That's one of the positive stories about America is, you know, Germany has very, very, you know, like other countries, for example, and Japan is probably the most, you know, the starkest example of this, where the definitions of what it means to be Japanese is very much tied to blood and heritage and genetics. Yeah. Same with countries like, you know, some of the European countries like Germany, et cetera. We don't have that in America. Right. In America, you need to believe in America. And that's what makes American. And so
Right.
I think that America is positioned, even though we're going through a lot of these growing pains right now. I think the thing that has historically pulled us through all of these growing pains, all of these radical changes that our country has gone through, is that anyone can be an American, right?
True.
And
True.
all you need to do, you could be born here, regardless of your family's heritage, and you need to believe in what America is and identify as an American. And that's going to enable America to weather a lot of changes. And if
Uh,
we can focus more on that shared identity, going back to how to reduce stereotypes, we can focus more on that shared identity, then we see people a lot more, you know, a lot more willing, I think, to sit down at the table together.
I totally agree. But phrases like "let's shut down the border and see how it goes," which has never been attempted in American history and seems to be quite popular these days, scare me and seem to be the opposite of uh, good things. I will point out, if anybody wants to, you were talking about how if you have a small community and you drop some Latino people in there, people freak out. If you have a community that's already got land people, and if you put a few more in, they don't mind. So, documentary Farmingville. I recommend everybody watches it. Farmingville was about how they put 300 Mexicans in a small town in New York called Farmingville, and the town lost their mind, lost it, went crazy because 300 Mexicans. Now, I'm here in Fresno. We have thousands of Mexican day laborers everywhere. And I thought, this is ridiculous. You guys are freaking out about this. But one of my favorite things was in the Farmingville thing, these New Yorkers said, we're so diverse. We're Puerto Rican. No, we're Portuguese and French and English and Spanish. Diverse. So therefore, you can't say that we're racist because we don't want all these damn Mexicans around, because we're diverse. That's what they said. So and this is New York, the other diversity hotspot. So I'm just like, how does everybody view diversity? The same way we do here in California? Not always the same. I kind of saw this and was like a little bit disgusted because I thought we're diverse. We're diverse. We love diversity. You ain't showing it. That's not how that works. And just to back you up, we have to have immigration. You're totally right. It's the only thing keeping America economically afloat. When you look at China, they're having a rise, but they're going to have a massive crunch because they have a demographic problem. They're running out of young people. That's never going to be an issue for us far into the future, and it's because immigration. That's the only thing keeping us with a large youth population in comparison to our geopolitical superpower rivals. People don't get that. Our population has to grow every year for there to be an economic growth. We want to have 2 to 4% growth. We do that by growing the population. Other people do it other ways. I got into this debate because as a boy, I had a lot of people telling me, we're so nice to those Latin people, letting them in here out of the kindness of our heart, and that's the only reason we do it. And they go, actually, no. If you stop doing it, you'd have what's called economic recession and collapse. So total opposite of what you're saying. It's not just largesse and being nice. It's a economic and national security issue. So just wanted to totally back you up on that. We're basically at the end. Is there something I should have asked you that I missed?
Well, this conversation is so fun. I'm sure we could have gone in so many other directions.
I'll have you back if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I was going to say to be continued because there's
to be continued. I'll have you back. And if you know anybody, you don't have to say. I'll send you a copy of the video today. If you know anybody else who might be willing to have a fair conversation, we'd love to talk to them. Don't have to name.
I mean, if there's a list of topics that you'd love to talk about. I know that you focus on political polarization, which I think is a really important topic. I can definitely reach out to folks that I know in political science, political psychology, and things like that.
I really, really appreciate that. It helps the series, and this is a labor of love.
Yeah. No, I really love what you're doing, and I think that's great.
We got started when Marjorie Taylor Greene said, should we have a national divorce on President's Day? And I was looking around for coverage, and I didn't find much. And all I found was an article from, I think, the New York Times, where they interviewed 3 professors who were all from a coastal university. And they said, well, the problem is social media and those evil Republicans. Done. Thorough
Wow.
review of the whole situation. Thank
Was
you. And I'm like, hold on. I think this is, even if it is the Republicans, I think this is a little bit too quick for you guys to jump to that. This is way more complex. Nobody was doing accurate reporting. Looked at PBS Arizona, Niskanen Center. They do a few. So I was like, you guys need to be getting up in the 20-30 range, and you need to be talking to rural conservative professors, Midwest
Absolutely.
professors, coastal professors, Southern professors who have differences of opinion about this, who are Republican, are Democrat, and then seeing what side of consensus. And that they're not doing that. It's been a year and a half into this project. Washington Post announced another series that was going to basically be doing the same thing that I was doing. They're up to 6 professors, again, mostly coastal elite university professors, who again come up with evil, nasty Republicans in social media. And if we could just wave one, everything goes away. And I'm like, what about ranked choice voting, primaries, the big sort, demographic shifts? You guys aren't covering any of this. You're going to Republicans are racist and they hate America, and social media exacerbates their violent voices. Done. Thorough understanding, completely understood. I'm like, that is sophomoric by definition.
Well, complicated issues have multiple causes and complicated solutions, and beware of anyone who tries to reduce it to simple terms. It's not going to get us very far, unfortunately. And I do think I think the question's an important one to raise, because it is what people ponder when they see America going in a polarized direction. And if we know that the solution to reducing stereotyping and prejudice is not becoming more homogenous and narrow in your worldview, but becoming more exposed to alternative points of view, and realizing your head won't explode, and realizing you all can actually go out for beers and have a good time, and and still raise your kids and play softball or whatever, then I think we feel a little bit calmer.
I don't know what it is. My mom's full-blood Mexican. She came from Texas to California. My dad's Caucasian, but he spoke fluent Spanish, because in Texas, my mom doesn't, because the Tejanos discourage you to speak Spanish as part of the culture. I'm not going to get into that. But in California, we're like, everybody should speak Spanish. So I was born there, and I didn't get it, but my mom forced me to go to sushi when I was a boy, and forced me to go eat Indian food, and she forced me to go meet gay people, and she forced me to go do all these things. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And I didn't get it till I was older. She was desensitizing me to being weirded out by different people and different things. And now me and my brother are experts on all the ethnic cuisine in Fresno County. I can tell you every type of ethnic cuisine. What's the best restaurant? We go, so
your mom was brilliant.
And just getting that she was doing what you were talking about.
Yeah.
She was desensitizing me and my brother early on, so that when we met other people and they were different, we didn't go, oh, weird. We go, oh, fascinating.
Yeah. And also letting you know that your way of seeing the world is not the only way of seeing the world.
Yes.
That's so vital. Human beings we're so eclectic and interesting, and like that should be, we can channel that, and we can embrace that. Like think of our potential, right? And to be afraid of it, you're just hiding from humanity. Like you can't escape it. I mean, identical twins who are genetic clones aren't even the same.
Right.
You can't escape diversity. So
right.
Find joy in it.
First time we went to sushi, I got mad. We went to a very high-end sushi restaurant, one of the best. I love sushi now, but as a boy, I saw her write the bill, and we walked out, and I was almost yelling at her. I'm like, you paid $40? They didn't even cook the fish. What are you doing? She spent 5 minutes explaining to me how that's how they do that in their culture. And what I got was what they considered to be the best made dish. So in my perspective, it was uncooked, but in their perspective, they worked very hard and put a lot of effort into this dish. And I need to be appreciative of that.
Yeah, it was so perfect. It didn't need cooking.
So it took me a couple of years to get. Now I'm a sushi fan. At the beginning, I was like, what? These guys are ripping you off. So
Hey, you're talking to a fellow sushi fan, so I'm right there with you. And
I was a boy. In my defense, I was a boy. I was like 8 to 12. Okay, I'm learning the world, so I didn't know.
Oh, I think most 8 to 12-year-olds don't appreciate sushi, so you're in good company. But
yeah, I was like,
a lot will eventually come around.
Where's the dino nuggets? Get this out of the
Yeah, exactly. If it's not some shade of yellow or orange, don't even
hamburgers and fries. Although they did raise us on menudo early on. That's another thing. If I was not raised Mexican, I would never touch menudo. I would not look at it. I would never tell anybody to eat it.
My dad made menudo all the time, and I still can't stay. I would leave the house because the smell was so strong.
Right? And I was like, I tried to get some of my, I didn't even try it. I tried to have some of my Caucasian friends try it, and they're like, hold on, what's in there? Try it. And then they go, you really want me to try that? And they go,
no, you don't. Oh my gosh, but isn't it the cure-all for everything? You have a hangover, menudo. You're sick, menudo. You have a headache, menudo.
That goes for everybody. You don't have to be Latin. If you have a hangover or you're sick or congested, you're going to want to go get yourself a giant bowl of menudo, hot menudo, eat 1 or 2 of those. You're going to be cleaned out. It's the spices and the heat it's something that it's okay. Final thought. This is the question I always ask everybody. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person watching this interview, and they go, wow, I learned a lot. I didn't know that prediction that Republicans will push for electoral college. I didn't know how we healed about stereotypes. I didn't know about existential threats. Brilliant. But I'm struggling to remember everything that was covered by this brilliant professor. But while I'm struggling, there's this one thing that she said, and it's 5 days after I've watched that video. And while I struggle to remember everything else, I can't get that one thing she said out of my head. And I have to keep thinking about it. What is that one thing you want somebody watching this to not be able to stop thinking about?
Actually, and this comes from an aspirational place and a hopeful place. I hope that the one thing people don't stop thinking about is the realization that despite our seeming polarization, that when you walk down the street, look at day-to-day society, we are remarkably cooperative. And that will be our salvation.
Totally agree. I've had some younger people as they get older go, are people good or bad? And I go, people are mostly good. Because if they were mostly bad, society would collapse. I mean, there's so much trust. And, when you go buy gas and you give them $5 and you expect them to run the pump. And I'm like, think about all the trust that goes through every single interaction. It wouldn't work if we were mostly bad. We'd be Hobbesian Lord of the Flies mess. So obviously, most people are good. Most people want to play by the rules and get their thing. And obviously, there's that 1% who can, I don't want to play by the rules, or I have my own idea and I don't care who gets hurt. And unfortunately, sometimes they can be very damaging while they don't represent the majority. Totally agree. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'm going to send you a copy of the show if you have any recommendations for any other guests, and I will definitely have you back, Professor.
Oh, wonderful. It's so nice spending this time with you.
And happy Halloween.
Thank you. You too.
That's my favorite season. All right, we'll leave it there, and I'll see you all later.
All right, bye-bye.